George, curious little monkey. He's so full of curiosity. Here's to George, the curious little monkey. He's as curious can be.
Curious George goes to a TV station. I've got 2 tickets to Happy Al's TV program, George, said the man with the yellow hat. It should be a lot of fun. Let's go. So they drove off to the television station. There, they met Happy Al, but he wasn't happy. My special guest hasn't arrived, he said. George, said the man, while I talk to Al, you can look around, but don't get into trouble. George walked down the hall and looked into one of the rooms. An actor was sitting in a chair and was being made up for a TV show. Please close your eyes, said the woman, and she began putting makeup on his face. Then she stopped. George was watching. I've got to get more tissue, she said. Just keep your eyes closed. And she left the room. George looked at the actor's face. Then he picked up a tube of red lipstick. George was curious. Could he paint with it? He put some of the lipstick on the actor's face. Then he used some pink paste. And finally, some white powder all over. Just then, the makeup lady came back. Oh, my, she yelled. What happened to your face? The actor looked in the mirror. Who did that? He shouted. It must be that monkey, said the woman. George was scared. Let's get him, the actor shouted. But George got away just in time. At the end of the hall was a door with a red light flashing. George ran into a room full of cameras and lights and people. A man behind a camera was waving angrily. Get out of my way, he whispered. But where could George go? He had landed right in the middle of Happy Al's show. He was on television. I'm sorry, Happy Al said to his audience. My special guest is late. But the audience wasn't paying any attention to Al. They were watching George. Look who's there, shouted a boy. Happy Al turned around. Everybody cheered. Why, George, he said. You've come just in time. Let me introduce you to my audience. Announcing my special guest for today, Curious George. Just then, the actor and the makeup woman caught up with George. There you are, shouted the actor. I'll teach you to fool around with makeup. Look at that funny face, shouted a girl. What a great show, said a boy. Everybody laughed. I don't think it's funny, said the actor. But my audience does, said Happy Al. When the TV show was over, Al turned to George. Well, George, he said, thanks to you, we had a good show, even though you shouldn't have fooled around with the makeup. Come back again soon. Just then, the man with the yellow hat came over. Good show, Al, he said. I enjoyed it. But now your special guest has to go home with me. And so they did.
Here's to George, the curious little monkey. He must know what everything's about. Curious George, the curious little monkey. What's he up to? Let's find out.
Curious George goes to a flower show. I'm going to be a judge at the flower show, said the man with the yellow hat. we'll have to leave soon, George. So off they went in their little blue car. Before the show started, George's friend had to meet with the other judges. "Take a look around, George," he said. "I won't be long, but don't get into trouble." George wandered off. There were beautiful bushes and flowers all around. A gardener was trimming a large bush. Clip, clip went his clippers. Soon the gardener laid down the clippers and left. George went over to the bush. Was clipping a bush as much fun as it looked? George was curious. He picked up the clippers and began to trim. It was fun. Then he stepped back to look at his work. It didn't look right. One side of the bush was higher than the other. George went back to work. But this time, he cut off too much on the other side. So he had to clip more and more and more. Before he knew it, he had clipped the bush right down to the ground. Just then, a little girl came along. Her name was Jane. She was holding a vase with flowers. "I was going to enter these in the flower show," she said. "But I'm afraid they won't win. There's nothing special about them." George looked at her flowers. She was right. They were not very special. Suddenly, he heard someone shouting, "My beautiful bush, you've ruined it." It was the gardener. He was angry, and George was scared. Where could he go? Then he had an idea. He grabbed Jane's vase and ran into the tent. Inside, rows and rows of flowers were on display. Some were in seashells, some were in old bottles, some were in baskets. There was an empty space on the table. A good place to put Jane's flowers. Meanwhile, the judges were looking at all the different displays, row after row. The man with the yellow hat was with them. They were trying to decide which one should win. "Look, there's something unusual," said one of the judges. "A statue of a monkey with flowers." It was George with Jane's vase in one hand and one leg in the air. He stood very still. So still that he really did look like a statue. The man with the yellow hat stared at him. He did not say a word. He just winked. "I suggest that this one get first prize," said one of the judges. They all agreed and stuck a blue ribbon on George. That hurt, but George still looked like a statue. Then Jane came running over, followed by the gardener with his clippers. I won, Jane shouted, "thanks to George." The gardener was still angry. He tried to grab George, but the judge stopped him. "Please, please," she said, "you mustn't disturb our beautiful arrangement." Jane smiled. "They think he's a statue," she whispered to the gardener. The gardener smiled too. "Well," he said, "I don't think a statue could cut down a bush. Or could he? But don't do it again," he said. No, George wouldn't do it again. His whole body hurt. Being a statue is hard work. "Come on, champ," said the man with the yellow hat. "Let's go home." And so they did.